Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of At Home with Mark. We are season 2, episode 19, and we have Tor Mogensen from, now Universal Audio.
Yeah.
How you doing, Tor?
Yes, I'm really good, thanks.
Good, man. It's great to have you here. I was telling you before we started, you have a lot of fans. A lot of people were hitting me up in Instagram saying, I'm so excited to watch this episode. So know that you have a lot of pedal nerds out there that are in your wake bowing.
Wow, I'm honored and a little puzzled, but that's okay.
So I wanted to kind of hear the backstory of how you became a musician and everything, because I had a very specific moment in my life that I knew I wanted to play guitar, like really pinpoint specific. And some people don't. Sometimes it's like a vague, like you've always been doing it. But what was, what got you into playing music and being a musician?
Oh God, I think mine is more of a progressive kind of thing rather than like one specific moment. My dad plays bass, and my parents were always sort of trying to get me to play an instrument, and I was like, I'd rather play soccer or something else. So I didn't get into the music thing and started like really playing until I was like 13, I think, something like that. And it was just like I had a really good friend who played guitar and sang, and I think I just sort of got inspired, and suddenly my music taste changes. I was like heavily into hip hop when I was like really young, all the very first stuff that came out, and then some other friends, we started listening a lot to like 60s stuff, which was what I heard in my home as well. My parents are like old hippies, so they'd be listening to the Beatles and Hendrix and Doors and all that stuff, and you're suddenly like, oh, wait a second, all that stuff is that's guitar based thing. So it's like kind of tried to get my parents to buy me an acoustic guitar. Well, actually an electric, but they were like, yeah, we'll buy you an acoustic first and then we'll see.
Right.
And I was just totally immersed in that from the get-go. The way I learned was I didn't take any lessons, but I'm a really big Beatles fan, and at least in Denmark, you could buy this very big book with every single Beatles song they ever wrote, with chord progressions. So I'd just browse through it, and I'd find the one that was the easiest to begin with and play through that, and then go on to the next one, and then you'll end up with some pretty advanced ones at the end of it. But that was sort of the beginning of getting into just learning rhythm, learning chords, and then from there it was like all Jimi Hendrix and guys like that. But it wasn't like a specific moment. I can't really pinpoint one specific time where it's like I have to do this. It was just sort of like something that just kept building until I suddenly realized this is something I have to do.
Man, that's crazy too, because if you're learning Beatles song after Beatles song, like their knowledge of harmony, albeit they never were officially like trained in music and all that, like their knowledge of harmony was so advanced. So you had to have a pretty heavy harmonic knowledge from a young kid then.
I don't think I didn't at that point. I just at that point you don't really understand what's going on harmonically. You're just like, oh, G, E minor. Right. It could have just been two other chords. I think one of the interesting things about Beatles is that some of the chord progressions and choices they did were kind of weird compared to like classic, more diatonic chord progressions. They'd always throw in like this odd chord, which I think in retrospect and in hindsight, I think that's one of the things that really drew me to them, was that even though a lot of the melodies are fairly major based, a lot of times they'll throw in these odd chords that just makes you go like, huh, something happened that you're not used to listening to. The whole music theory thing, and I'm by no means like an expert in that, but I can get my way around it, some of that stuff. But yeah, that came later. That came way later.
Do you remember the first tune that you learned that you got down rhythmically and everything that you could play and get through it? Was there one tune that you were so proud of when you first got it down?
Oh, it's probably something like Revolution or Back in the USSR. Some of those more like, pretty easy, not full chords, but like, more like, basically fast blues style songs, because, you only had to worry about, 2 strings at a time. So it
Right, right.
was probably something like that. And then I tried to learn like some of the more advanced stuff, but that was, that was like putting your fingers like, and then playing, and then, oh, next part. And then you kind of move your fingers over to the next. But I was never like, I wish I was more of a, like the kind of guitar player who could, there's guys who can just take an acoustic guitar and just sit down and like woo an entire crowd and just be like, basically, the local John Mayer kind of guy. I'm totally not that guy. I can never remember full songs. I can play like the cool lick from some Steve Vai song, and I can play like the intro to like a Jeff Buckley. First of all, I learned like the weird songs that nobody knows, and I typically can't play the whole song. I can play like little bits of it. So I suck at that sort of guitar entertainment kind of style. I wish I was better at it.
Oh, your brain works in other ways, and you create wonderful toys for us to step on. So there you go. So I wanted to. So let's go back. So your parents were obviously, your dad was a musician, but the music that you grew up on, man, to have that music in the house, like I didn't really have my parents. They listened to music, but like not like that. Like I wasn't exposed to Jimi Hendrix by my parents and like the Doors. Like I was exposed from my older siblings. So like, are you still, and is that music still holding a special place in your heart? Because like all the bands that you mentioned, I mean, I was a huge Doors fan growing up too. And Robbie Krieger was like a big influence on the way that I played guitar and in those angular ways that he played when I was a young guitarist. Is that stuff that you still love and listen to? And
oh yeah. So I mean, Jimi Hendrix is still the guy for me. Regardless of whatever happens, I'm just a giant Jimi Hendrix fan, both the guitar playing but also the music in general. And Beatles still holds the number one spot in just for everything. I think I actually play in a Beatles cover band now. So
oh really?
Yeah.
So hold on, sorry. How are you remembering all the chords?
I have to work on it. Luckily, it's a real band. It's not like me just playing, the full songs. I do my little George Harrison bit, and that, then I'd leave to somebody else to actually fill out all the important stuff.
Nice.
But yeah, that sort of music is, probably driving my girlfriend and kids nuts by always playing stuff that's like, pre 1980 or something like that. I love that. I love that era of music.
Are you of the experience camp, or are you of the Band of Gypsies camp?
Probably. I mean, I love all of it, but if I had to pick, I'm an experience guy.
Okay.
I really love that later, more experimental stuff, but I'm just a pop head. So, for me, even of all the albums, I'd probably say Access Boldest Love is my favorite. And that's probably the one that has the most like accessible tunes, for lack of a better word. But I love all of that stuff.
Did you, as a young guitarist, and so if you're super into Hendrix, like I find that when I plug in for a gig, like The Wind Cries Mary is my tone, like test for when I'm setting up. That kind of clean breakup-y kind of thing is like what I want my clean tone to sound like. Do you like do the same thing if you're plugging in to gauge, like I want my tone to be like this if it's clean, and if I'm using my volume knob to push it a little bit, it's got to sound like this. Do you do that stuff too?
Oh, I totally do that. So I mean, I've gone through stages of stuff because as much as we talk about all this basically hippie 60s 70s music that I grew up on and that I love, the majority of my musical life has actually been spent playing like crazy extreme metal. So that's the other part of how I play, and I probably am better at that, to be honest, than the other stuff. So I'm sort of torn between having loving all those vintage style tones and also the vintage way of getting sounds, which is exactly what you say, having an amp that's just sort of just on the verge of breakup. You get a clean sound by rolling down your volume, and just having more of a free flow with pedals and stuff, as opposed to the metal thing where it's like, the amp is doing the distortion. And if I need a little bit extra, I'll step on a tube screamer.
Right.
And everything is sort of planned out. I have one button and that adds delay and a mid boost and a little, a little volume boost for solo. So it's almost like two different personas in terms of, playing guitar.
When did the metal thing enter? Like, how old were you? So if you're 13-ish and you're playing guitar to Beatles tunes, when did metal enter? And then what was the exposure? Because you started with hip hop, and then you go into like 60s pop, and then you get how did that progression happen?
I think the hip hop thing was just because I was really young and got into BMX biking and graffiti and stuff, and that was just breakdancing and things like that. And then at some point I started listening to Hendrix and AC/DC, so that was sort of a natural progression. There's actually a very specific time with the more, I wouldn't even say the metal stuff, but just this other style of guitar playing. So my uncle is a jazz guitar player, and I used to visit him. He lives in Copenhagen. I live in another smaller city in Denmark, and I used to visit him a lot. And he would work during the day, so I'd just sort of walk around Copenhagen. And one day I stumbled upon this record store, and I went in and sort of browsed through the albums there. Wanted to buy something, and I stumbled upon this crazy cover with this guitar player with long hair and like a 7-string multicolored guitar. It was Divide. It was Passion and Warfare. I'm like, that looks cool. I'm gonna buy that. And it's weird because I was so immersed in that sort of 60s thing, and to me, Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and those guys were like the pinnacle of amazing, crazy guitar playing. And I'd never really heard Van Halen. I never really heard, Randy Rhoads, all these guys. So I didn't really I sort of skipped a couple of steps on the ladder. So when I went home and put that album on, I was just like, what the hell? What happened? How did I go from Jimi Hendrix being like, at least in, not necessarily in musicality, but at least in like technical prowess to that guy? That's nuts. And I just became like absolutely obsessed with learning to play that way. I spent ridiculous amount of times trying to essentially be Steve Vai. I don't think I can, but at some point I think I could literally just put on Passion and Warfare and just play the whole thing through and through. So obviously that doesn't go over too well in like your traditional, like, you play Beatles songs and suddenly somebody's like shredding all over the place. You don't want to do that. So I started looking at other places where I could, get to play some of that stuff that I've been practicing so hard to do. And that quickly led more down the sort of the metal scene. And by that time it was also like grunge came out. So I got really into that, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. So, you get a little bit more. I think a lot of guys who are into metal sort of, they start out with slightly mellower stuff. So I was like, oh, Soundgarden, that's, Alice in Chains, that's on the metal side of grunge, where maybe Nirvana and Pearl Jam are a little bit more on the rootsy side, right? So listening to that, then I got into Pantera, and then this, I don't want to say, well, it's a fairly famous Danish European band that was local, asked me to join them, and that was like serious, tuned down to be death metal with growling and everything. And to begin with, I was like, it was cool because they did European tours and they did albums and stuff. So I was totally, psyched about it, but I wasn't super into the music. And then you start listening to it, and you started listening to more of that style of music, and, it just grew on me. So sort of a progression as well.
So how old were you then when you were touring?
Oh God, I think I didn't join the band, but I worked for the band. When I turned 18, I got a van. That's not very common in Denmark. I know that's way more common in the States, but I had a car right when I got my driver's license at 18, which was pretty unusual. So obviously all the bands around were like, oh, can you load some beer? And I'm like, yeah, cool. Hang out on a Friday night and drink some beer and stuff. And they asked me to roadie, and the lead guitar player at the time was like, hey, can you actually also do the teching? Because if you go on stage before the show and just do crazily noodling, everybody will think I'm way better, because, if that's the guy just checking the sound, that must mean that the real guitar player is even better. So he stopped at some point, and the guys asked me to join. So it's sort of like a progression. And I think I was 96, so I must have been 23, if memory serves me correct.
Man. So let's go backwards a little bit because you just dropped a bomb on me with the grunge thing. Because I am a huge and like people that subscribe to my channel, I talk about Pearl Jam all the time. So like
Oh man.
Pearl Jam is the reason I'm a guitar player, man. There's no other band that I can credit. I can credit my friend Brad Knapp sitting in his bedroom playing NBA jams, and he put that CD on, and I stopped playing the game and put the controller down and sat in front of the stereo and listened to the whole album, listened to all 10.
Yeah.
So like that band, that band and Nirvana were like my first two, I think, where I was really shedding on. Like Nirvana's like the tape, never mind's the tape where I learned, oh, you can move power chords. I can find where the root note is. You know what I mean? But what do you like about Pearl Jam? Like, I'm just curious because I'm trying to get Josh Scott to come on here because he's a huge Pearl Jam fan and go through the whole discography and pull out his favorite songs. Like, what are your favorite Pearl Jam tunes, and like, why do you like Pearl Jam?
Well, first of all, Pearl Jam is that's my best concert experience ever. So back in, I think it must have been 91. I was also in Copenhagen, but this time with a girlfriend at the time, and we were just like, what should we do on a Saturday night? And we're kind of going through the newspaper, seeing if there are any shows, and it's like, oh, there's this band called Pearl Jam, and I think they were a little bit slower to sort of get started in Denmark. So at that time, I was like, I think I heard that song alive, and that was really, really good. So hey, let's go see them. And that show was just nuts. It was crazy good, and it just blew my mind.
Was that the show where they played acoustic?
No, that was like full on rock band with Eddie Vedder, like throwing the microphone cord over the lightning rod, and just basically doing guitars and swings out into the audience and back again, and everything was like totally crazy. So I think that for me, I'm definitely mostly into the earlier stuff. I don't want to say I lost track because I still listen to some of the later stuff, but it was definitely like 10, and that sort of really got me. And I think that what I liked about them was that I think of all the bands of that era, they were the most like the music that I grew up listening to. They had this sort of Hendrixy, little bit more rootsy psychedelic vibe, where to me, Nirvana has a little bit more of a punk edge to it, and maybe Soundgarden, you can hear sort of the stoner rock, Black Sabbath sort of vibes to that. So it's a little bit more metal, but that's sort of slower metal. And Alice in Chains definitely has some more like serious, almost 80s metal vibes to it. So if you take those four bands, which were like the biggest ones, at least for me, they each had their own sort of thing going on, and Pearl Jam was the band that sort of reminded me the most of the music that I'd listened to the most. Plus, Eddie Vedder is a ridiculous singer.
Yeah.
And Mike McCready is like, he's a big Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, which I am as well. So it was like, hey, what's not to like? You have crazy good music, an amazing singer with like the larger than life personality, and a lead guitar player who can really play, and even plays in the style of guitar that I absolutely love. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's that band, no matter what, any record they put out, I'll just buy it. I don't care. Like even if it sucks, I'll love it. You know what I mean? That's that's what they are to me. But and I felt the same way, man. I mean, I've talked about Soundgarden, Super Unknown. That's one of the most amazingly, just from front to back, song wise, it's an amazing album. But like, if you ever put headphones on and listen to that album, Super Unknown is one of the most beautifully produced records of that era. Like hands down.
I agree. I think that, but also I was heavily into Badmotorfinger, and I think it's Terry Date who produced both those albums, and he's just a monster. I mean, he produced my favorite Pantera stuff as well. So
what Pantera record did he produce?
Volga.
Oh, okay.
Volga Display of Power. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Pantera was as a snippet in my life, not a huge one. I just wasn't. I think like you, I'm opposite in the way that like I didn't go heavily down the metal route, but I appreciated it for what it was, and
Mhm.
I like the angst and the guitar tones is what I think I mostly appreciated about it. But I'm so hooked into pop. Like that's why Pearl Jam spoke to me, is because like it's basically it was like a pop band in a rock era.
Yeah,
You know what I
yeah.
mean, in a way. So, but yeah, that's so cool. I'm so happy to hear that. Warms my heart to hear that you have this stuff.
I
So,
was listening to Soundgarden today actually.
oh
So
really?
yeah, yeah.
I did you some of their like most recent stuff, like before Chris passed away. What was like the Kingdom Animal? What was the last album they
Yeah.
put out? I didn't hear that. I mean, is that something I should check out? I mean, I didn't get a chance to listen to it
I
yet.
honestly haven't heard that either. To be,
Yeah.
I think I'm getting to the age now that I swore I'd never get to, where it's like I find myself playing the old shit more than the new stuff, which is odd because I have way more access to everything now than back in the day, where it's like if you wanted to hear something, you literally had to go down and buy it. Now it's like it's all right there in front of you, right? But yeah.
Oh man. So then so if you're touring with this band, right? So you get into a situation where you're on the road, you're touring Europe, doing that thing, having a good time. At that time, were you already tinkering and messing with stuff? Like since you were teching, were you like hands-on learning, like trial by fire? Like what was going on there?
I was learning some stuff, but to be honest, and a pretty important point, I'm not a tinkerer in the sense that I couldn't do what Josh or Robert Keeley or some of these guys do, which is literally fire up the soldering iron and do stuff. I have no idea about any of that stuff. I think I'm more on the sort of the customer, the user, the guitar player's voice inside of a company. So I have some ideas about what would be cool, and then I totally rely on people that are way smarter than me to actually bring that into life. So I think that I didn't catch. I caught the sort of the gearbox obviously pretty early, but back in those days it was so different because you didn't have all the boutique pedal brands back then, and multi-effect was still pretty big at that when I sort of grew up. So I didn't really catch that sort of vintage and that whole thing vibe when at least to begin with. I just wanted like a red Strat because that's what Jimi Hendrix had. Right. So I getting into that stuff is a really, really, really long roundabout thing. So if we go from the top, so while I was touring with that band, I was also studying at the university at the same time, and the plan was to be a philosophy teacher of all things at the university. So I finished my master's degree in philosophy and media science and figured out that I really didn't want to do that after all. And at the same time, I'd been, this was right at the start of like, the very early beginnings of the internet. So we're talking like, oh God, I can't even 2002, 2001, 2000, where, every company had to have a website, and they typically built one and then they need to do the next one. But it was like, very early days. And I'd had some fun just fooling around with code. That's before you could do anything, before you could open up a browser and basically build a website by just filling out a few things. You literally had to code it. So I learned myself how to do that. And I got an internship at TC Electronic because TC is based in my hometown, and pretty much every musician who figure out at some point that they're probably not going to make a career out of playing guitar, they'll sort of seek towards that place because, hey, at least it smells a little bit like music. Right. So I got an internship there and eventually got a job there working as a web developer. And I did that for 4 or 5 years, actually, before switching over. So that was sort of my way into that. And then, once you're in TC and you start talking to all the engineers, and, it's impossible to not get bitten by that more technical side of things. Right. So that actually, it more or less came while working at TC, to be honest. I mean, I knew about gear and I had some very strong opinions about it, but I wasn't a nerd about it. That came later.
Right. So what was your first, like when you were touring, like were you playing through like a JCM 800 and like what were you playing through? What was like your first touring rig?
I played a dual rectifier, of
Oh,
course.
okay.
Yeah,
Makes
being a
sense.
metal guy, right? Yeah. So dual rectifier, and the band was like a real death metal band, so they tuned down to B, and I took my regular 6-string guitar and tuned it down to B, and I hated the feeling of that. It just sucked. I couldn't find strings that either they were too loose or they were too heavy. So at the end, I ended up buying a 7-string and just played. It was like one of those black Ibanez Universe, the Steve Vai model with the green
Mhm.
pickups. Pretty tasteless guitar. Apologies to anybody who still has one, but but I love playing that guitar. I played that exclusively for years and years and years, like as the only thing. So that was pretty much my rig. Then I had a G-Force, so that's the first of the TC Electronic multi-effect with a little loop switcher that one of the other guys from UA, James Santiago, who worked at Voodoo Lab at the time, he made that loop switcher that I used, called the
Man,
Ground Control. So
that's
yeah,
crazy. So full circle, man. Come back to
yeah,
like
totally, yeah,
work with that guy and stuff. That's
yeah.
nuts. I want to get to him later because I'm trying to kind of go through the timeline here. But okay, so post TC, so you're getting into like doing these interviews and having people on, like, whether it be Ariel or Josh Smith or whoever is coming through town touring, and you're
Yeah.
working on tone. Was the tone print thing a big part of what you helped those guys with too? Like when you're kind of working with some of these artists and everything, like what was your main function in that? Like, I know you said you were coding with them and then you kind of switched more into, was it more like pedal development, artist development kind of thing, or artist management kind of thing? Relations?
It was actually all business and pedal development. So my official title to begin with was product manager, and then I became a business manager. So my real job, to be honest, at TC was never anything artist based. It was managing the guitar business, and that involved basically treating that part of TC as a separate business with its own goals, and making sure that we had we helped those goals in terms of sales and came up with new products. So it was from like macro business down to coming up with the individual pedals, working with the engineers, with marketing, with sales, to make sure that they looked right, they sounded right, and everything. So that was my real job at TC, and that's actually the same thing I do here at UA. So that sort of more forward facing, like thing that people probably know me for, the few people in the world that know who I am.
Yeah, and that's
that sort of came almost by accident. So when video started getting popular, for doing demos, I remember watching like the early CVEX videos, loved those, and obviously Andy from back then Pro Guitar Shop, now Reverb. And it was just painfully obvious that we had to do something like that. And I tried to hire some different guys, native, either American or British guys that could speak proper English without a horrible accent. And we had some good guys in there doing it, but it was just I don't think they presented things the way I would ideally like them to present it, and just ended up being like really time consuming because I had to be there anyway and sort of like guide them through things. So at some point I was just like, okay, screw it, I'm not gonna worry about the accent, I'm just gonna do it. And that sort of, it almost took on a life of its own in terms of, because it was pretty much only me doing that at TC. I was the face of the company, which was sort of weird and never my plan to begin with. But I loved that part of my work, both at TC and obviously also here at UA. I think it's a lot of fun, but I always considered it more of like a little side thing. If I were to put like amount of time that I spend on doing videos as opposed to everything else I did and still do, it's like, it's probably less than 5% of my time being spent on doing video stuff.
Well, you're great at it, man. Like I told you beforehand, I mean, I've been watching you for probably a decade. And is there anything that you're like particularly proud of, like having like post TC that you had your hands dirty with, as far as development, that you can be like, look back on, like, man, I'm really proud of this thing.
I think I think if we talk about TC stuff, I think it's pretty much three things. So it's Polytune, the tone print things, and Ditto Looper. And I think that obviously those three products or product lines got really popular, so they sold a lot, which is obviously nice. And they took TC from basically being a company that didn't do a lot of guitar stuff to like being probably the second or third largest pedal brand in the world, which is that's something to be proud of. And on a more personal level, I think that they were fun products to do, because they were some part of them were like very traditional. It's not like nobody had done a tuner or a looper before, but they had something special that made them stand out. And that's sort of always been my philosophy, and still is to this day, in terms of, when you do a product, there has to be something that makes it unique. There has to be something that, piques the user's interest more than just, hey, we also made a pedal and it sounds really good.
Right. Well, I mean, I have like right here, man. This is my clip on, man. I have this, and I have one of the Peterson strobe tuners, and that one broke. This one takes a licking and keeps on ticking.
I have a few gray hairs right here in my beard. That's courtesy of that thing there. My God, that was a tough project.
Oh my God, dude, that's so great. So before we jump to UA, are there any pedals like that are outside of those companies? Like, are there any pedals that you in the past couple of years that have blown your mind, that you own and that you love? I'm just curious, because there's been dude, it's like the platinum age of gear, and we have so many options. And like, that's what I like about it, is that there's, even if somebody's like 3 companies are making a TS clone, they're all a little bit different. They all have a little bit of difference. Is there anything that you like, oh man, I got this past year and I love it?
Oh, there's a ton of stuff. I buy way too much gear. Looking down on one of my pedal boards down here, it's like, there's so much awesome stuff. So a couple of shout outs to people that make amazing stuff. So I have funnily enough, it's sort of a tribute to a UA product, because I have the Cali 76 from Origin, the compressor, which is essentially a 1176, big rack processor, classic thing from UA that's, put into a pedal, and it sounds awesome. It's a great pedal. I recently I was on the wait list for like a million years. I actually forgot I was on the wait list, but I got a King of Tone not too long ago. I got a mail like, yeah, you signed up like 3 years ago. I was like, oh, should probably get that. That's amazing. That was, I don't know if it's worth the wait, but that was, yeah. There's so much stuff. Walrus does some really cool stuff. I think it's interesting because there's sort of different approach. I sort of compare the pedal market these days almost to like the beer revolution that happened with microbreweries in the last 15 years, where it's like, it's really hard today to become like the new Heineken or the new Carlsberg, which is the biggest Danish brand. But you can sort of find a little niche and sort of be really great within that niche and say that our company is about this, or our brand is about that. And I think there are some really cool companies. Earthquake is amazing at sort of catering to that more experimental shoegazery kind of guys. There's probably not a lot of metal guys who use them. Maybe there are. Maybe I'm just ignorant. But I think that for what they do and what that brand is, they do an amazing job. You mentioned it's JHS. But I mean, to be honest, these days, I buy a lot of new stuff, but I'm thinking so much into like finding like old both like classic and also just like quirky pedals that, so looking
Yeah.
down here, I have my TS808, like an original one, old Rat, old TS10, like, just getting all this old stuff. That is a lot of fun as well.
That's awesome. Mario, thanks for the super chat. What's your go-to amp right now?
You guys can't see this, but I have one amp that I play in another metal band. So that's, my go-to amp for live stuff is an EVH 50 watt.
Ooh,
the one
okay.
with 6L6s for metal. It's essentially like a 5150, just tweaked a little bit. So for metal stuff, I really like that. But you guys can't see this. But over here, there's a 71 Marshall Super Lead.
Oh, man.
That I really love. And it just broke the other day. I just called my guy, so I need to get it fixed. On top of that, there's an 83 Marshall JMP that has been modded by an awesome guy in Denmark called Peter Kosek. He does like essentially the same thing that that Jose Arredondo and some of those guys would do to like Steve Vai's amps. Basically put in an extra gain stage, and it goes from like being a rock amp to like a fire breathing monster. So I play that a lot at for especially for solos and stuff. If I have to do anything like that, that's killer. Then down here, I have a lot of amps here. So down here, there's a little 6505, which again is essentially it's what Peavey had to call the 5150 after they got out of the deal with Eddie. So it's a mini 20 watt head, which is that I can, if you play metal, I can recommend this little amp enough. It's tiny, it sounds amazing, it sounds huge, and it's ridiculously cheap.
Yeah.
I would literally take that out on a gig and be happy if I knew that the PA could if I didn't have to rely on the volume from the amp to hear myself. That would be killer. And then the last one that I have down here is a Tone King. Are you familiar with those guys? Imperial?
Yeah. So Mark Bartel lives. So I'm outside of Baltimore. So Mark Bartel is literally 20 minutes from me, and I can probably tilt this over here. Do you see that? That's his new company, Bartel. He dropped that off last weekend or 2 weeks ago, and I did a video on that. Amazing. I mean, I played through the Imperial once in Chicago Music Exchange, and my mind was blown. And that was when he was still with Tone King. But sorry, sidetrack. Anyway, so which one is next to you?
That's the Imperial.
Oh, okay.
First version.
That
the
amp
one
is
without
killer.
It's so good. And I pretty much just stick it on the rhythm channel because I'm a sucker for those blackface sounds, and just crank the shit out of it through an aux, and then that's probably what I play the most at the moment. Actually, it's that Imperial, unless I have to do some tracking for metal stuff, which happens a lot, and then I play through the little Peavey for rhythm stuff, and the modded JMP for solos.
Man, that's a fun collection there.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Tor, so talk to me about the development of these three pedals for UA. So I told you I got a chance to mess with the Starlight and with the Astra. I didn't get a chance to mess with the Golden, but like, so you and James were both responsible for those pedals?
Yeah.
Like you guys are the main development? Okay, cool. And how cool was that? So when you got that gig and you came back to work with James, like how funny was that? Or had you been talking to him in the past, or like?
Oh yeah, we've been talking for easily 10 years. I think this dates all the way back to I think maybe him borrowing like a Polytune at a NAMM show like years and years ago, and we just kept in touch, and ever since. And I think I know a lot of people in the industry. James knows everybody, and by everybody I literally mean everybody. So it's awesome to work with him, and I literally can't say enough good things about this guy. First of all, he's a super nice guy, which always helps, but he's just he has the most amazing set of ears that I've ever experienced. And his knowledge about everything guitar, but especially everything guitar, vintage guitar, is just mind-boggling. It's sort of like you think you're pretty good. You walk around in your own little bubble and you're like, I know shit. And then you talk to somebody and you're like, oh, damn, I'm just a novice when it, so that's, working with him is just absolutely amazing. Yeah. So I think that, I think we complement each other pretty well. So on more like laying out the pedals, what should the knobs do, what algos, what effects should be in there. That a lot of that is me, and also more on the business side of things. And then James is the golden ear, so he's the guy who's like, okay, so now we decided that there's a tape echo in there. When does it actually sound enough like a real tape echo? And that is, he has a dedication to making that, committing to that at a level that I've never seen anybody have before. And, the know-how and the ears to actually, pull it off as well. So it's a pleasure.
Dude, how long did that take to get right? Because that delay pedal is, well, first of all, it does so much. Like, it really does. Like, and like, I didn't even scratch the surface of it, really, but like the Echo Rec type of like circuit, like how long did that take for you guys to get all like, because you can hear like mechanical things almost. Yeah. Like, how long did that take?
Way too long. So the funny thing is, so there is actually a UAD plugin called the EP34 that we're like, oh, we can use that. And then, we listen to it. It's like, we probably want to change a couple of things, because, the EP34 plugin is also, it's sort of a mix between the EP3 and the EP4, which was pretty big in studio, circles. But for guitar players, it's all about the EP3, right? That, that's the one that Jimmy Page used. That's the one that Eddie Van Halen used. That's the one that, Eric Johnson uses. So we're like, oh, that's the one. And we got to have everything. And it kept going. So it's like, oh, we need to make sure that we model, the noise, because you can, if you want to get the oscillation right, you actually have to have the noise. A lot of, I see a lot of other, no pointing fingers, but a lot of times you'll have somebody doing like an emulation of an Echoplex. And once it gets to the oscillation part, and where it goes into like crazy feedback, it doesn't sound right. And it's because the noise that the actual Echoplexes make contributes to how it sounds. So we had to add that. And then it's like, oh, but once it gets to that, there's also these weird dropouts. And that's actually the tape splice.
Right.
Where, it's just, it's like a strip that's taped together. And once you hit that tape part, the sound cuts out for a little while. And James would actually sit there with a timer to see how long it would take for the splice. And then tell, so every roughly two something minutes, there has to be this splice, and here's how it sounds. And it's
my God, dude, that's amazing.
And the funny thing is, so you do this sort of thing, right? And it's like building Legos, where every single little thing sort of adds a little bit to the full picture, but you don't really, because you're so knee deep in it, and you're sort of, you're so focused on one specific thing, you can't see the full picture. But once we were sort of like done, and it's like all these things were like put together in the algorithm, and we stepped back and actually listened to it, it was like, okay, this really is something special, And at the end of the day, the litmus test for how, whether it was good enough was that, when James could literally do an A/B test and couldn't tell the difference between the real machine and the algorithm, that's when we stopped, not before that. And I'd almost don't want to say how long it took, because I'll get finance at UA on my back. It took way too long. But
man, well, my buddy Terry is saying that the aesthetic and versatility seem way up his alley, and I would have to agree. Like, the aesthetic on what you guys did I mean, I didn't expect anything less from UA because I told you, like, before we started the show, I've been in Pro Tools forever, and I'm just trying to switch to Luna, and like every plugin and everything within Luna is just like super sexy. Like
Yeah,
everything just looks like, from just like little stuff like a tape machine, like looks like a tape machine. Like instead of like pulling up a plugin and it's like, square wheels like
yeah,
rolling like a neon green kind of thing. I didn't expect you guys to do anything less. And they feel like, when I got them, first and foremost, they were smaller than I thought they were going to be. Like surprising. And they're not small, but like they were smaller than I thought they were going to be when I held them in my hand, which was nice because it's like a perfect like pedal platform. Like I have a pedal train, what is it? Junior, I guess. I can fit like 8 pedals on it or 6 pedals on it.
yeah.
And it was great. Stuff fit in perfectly with whatever else I was using. And it's really, really intuitive. And like the instructions manual are just super intuitive. So you guys must have spent a lot of time on like, how do we explain how to use these? But
Oh yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's 2 guys at UA that works on nothing but creating all the documentation, and they're amazing guys, both of them, and they spend a lot of time getting this right. And we still, all the manuals, all the main manuals are, they're online now. There's little quick start guides in the box, but you get the full manual online, and they're still being revised all the time. Just because if we get a question in support and it's like, oh, this is not, maybe it's not fully clear, then there'll be little tweaks here and there all the time. So yeah, and I think in general, and that's working at UA has, in general, is just a real treat. And I think for anybody who loves to make products, it's really fun, and it's really liberating to work for a company where the quality bar is set at the very top. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with setting it somewhere else. I was a lot of the reason why TC pedals cost what they cost is because of me, because I decided that that's where I think that they should be in the market. But having the opportunity to actually make something where it's like, we don't compromise, whether it's the analog circuit inside the pedals, whether it's like spending, just finding like the most ridiculously powerful processor so that we can actually run the algos the way we want to run them, and with the detail we want to run them. Or as you said before, with the enclosure, a lot of times when you make products, there's a lot of compromises involved. And actually, getting to work on products where it's just like, we're UA and we make the best products. We want to make the best products we can possibly do. That's the goal. That has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's got to be liberating to be able to have that ability, because in this industry, like you're saying, I mean, there's probably a lot of brick walls that you have to barrel through too with some companies to get things approved like that. But for you guys, it's so forward thinking. Like everything that UA does, I feel like is so like 10 steps ahead of itself. Like I don't know if there's an NDA on this, but like I'm hoping that there'll be more guitar pedals, maybe.
I can't comment on that.
But yeah, I mean, it's just like, the Apollo that I just bought. Like I told you, it's leaps and bounds. It's funny because I gave Drew some shit because I was like, dude, I just spent all this money and it doesn't even come with the Thunderbolt cable. What's up with that? And he was like, well, we don't know how big you want it. I was like complaining. And then I went and bought one, and I came home, plugged it in that night, and I was like, okay, I forgive him. This is the most dope interface I've ever used in my life. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing, man. Like that's why I think there's no substitution. I mean, it's obvious that in the industry, like UA is like up here in terms of pro audio gear, and like those pedals are an extension of it. Like they're pro audio gear. So and like you had a part of that, and that's got to feel really good because there's so many people out there that are chomping at the bit to play through it.
Yeah, I mean, this has been we've been working on this for a long, long time. The project actually started before I even started at UA, so it's been a long time. So actually, seeing them out in the world, and obviously hearing that people like them, and starting to hear on different media people making music with them is just awesome. And I think not to sort of delve on all the other crazy stuff that's going on in the world right now, but the fact that we actually made these pedals, or at least almost half of the time we spent making these pedals were done remote. There's not a single person, and hasn't been for more than a year, at UA headquarters. So everybody who worked on these projects were literally at home, and we've done the whole thing through Zoom, and which just blows my mind that we could even pull that off.
That's crazy. I didn't even think about that. That's nuts. So like, and for what you guys are doing now, like, so getting these products out, obviously, like, that's like, get them out in the world, get them on boards, get them on stage, right?
Yeah.
Get them in front of people. But like, I'm excited to see what's going to happen, in the future here with you guys, because between you and James, like, so James is responsible for the aux pretty much, right? Like, basically. Yeah. So, and I want to get one of those, but I'm afraid there's going to be like a version 2 release, and I'm right when I buy the old one, I'm like, damn it, like, but like that thing, the first time I plugged into one of those, that thing blew my mind. I mean, there's been pedals, and I don't mean to throw shade at Strymon, because I love Strymon, but like, I tried the Iridium because I was like, maybe for my YouTube videos, and I start doing some demos, I can go through the Iridium and it'll make it cleaner, and I can do it in the middle of the night and not wake my kid and my wife up. You know what I mean? But I don't think it took my pedals well. It sounded harsh, like there was too much high in there. It was losing the body and the warmth, the fuzz and stuff that I normally get through an amp, through my 2-rock. But then when I tried it through the aux, and I ran my pedal board through my 2-rock, through that, it sounded just like it was in the room. Yeah. It's just insane.
I love that product. When I started it, I've been looking at it before I started at UA, and I've been talking to James about it, and it's like, I don't know if I need it enough for me to sort of warrant buying one. But then when I started working at UA, they sent one over for me, and I love that thing. I love it so much more than I thought I would. It's not that I didn't think I would love it in terms of how it sounded. I just didn't think I would use it that much, but I use it every single day. The most dangerous thing about it, to be honest, is the fact that, all these amps I just sort of mentioned before, that happened after I got the aux, because now all of a sudden I can sit here at home and actually, I live in an apartment building. I can't crank amps. There's no way. And now I can have all these heads and stuff, and I don't have to actually play them loud. I can just put my earphones on or headphones on and just, get amazing tones, and I can record at home, so it's probably the one piece of gear I use the most of all my music gear at the moment, and it's just a killer piece of equipment.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, to the point where the first time I plugged in and I was going through cabinets and changing mics and everything, like, I was genuinely shocked at how good it sounds.
Yeah.
And I think when we went in to do the basic tracks for my last record with Drew, he was like, just bring your head and we'll go through the aux when you guys are tracking. And he's like, because we're just going to dump the guitar tracks, right? We're going to do other. And I was like, yeah. So I was like, okay, but is it going to feel, you know what I mean? Is it going to feel good when I'm in the room? Because we're like a jam band-ish, like we improvise and stuff a lot. So when I got in that room and I was like, holy, I was like, this is like one of the best tones I think I've ever gotten. Like, I almost didn't dump the scratch tracks because I was like, that sounds so good. Am I going to be able to make it sound as good? Like, if we mic my cabinet, and we did, of course. But man, it is. If you guys have never played through one of those, it's a treat. Like, try to get your headphones on and get into one of those things. It sounds so damn good. So anyway, last thing I wanted to ask you. So from working with all of like the different companies that you've worked with and the people that you've worked with, is there one story of working with an artist where you were, I don't know if I want to say starstruck, but like, is there a moment that you can remember of working with someone that you're like, oh my gosh, I get to work with this person and help them out?
There's been a few times. So the first time, I'll mention two. So the first time was working with Dave Stewart from Eurythmics.
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a huge Rhythmics fan. I love that 80s stuff as well. And he's not a shredder by any means, but he's just an awesome songwriter and very much like a larger than life type of character. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I really can't. I don't know if you noticed, but I very rarely play in videos. I'll leave that to other people who are better than me at that. But he was like, yeah, I can't play by myself. So he's like, take a guitar and start playing. I'm like, oh shit. But, so that was sort of like a okay kind of moment. And then the other one that was probably the most like nerve-wracking for me was doing a Hall of Fame tour print with Steve Vai, because I've been such a fanboy. I mean, I still have like the Passion and Warfare tab book over here. Still have my Ibanez over there, Ibanez's over here. And it's like, it was like, that was a big deal for me.
That's
he
awesome,
he probably didn't know about that, but that was, that was really huge.
Yeah. He seems like a really nice guy too. He was actually, so my day gig is I work for the Berklee College of Music.
Yeah.
And I work remotely now out of Baltimore, but for a long time I was in the Boston office. And where my desk was right next to where they shot the videos. And Steve Vai wrote a course for Berklee. It's like a Steve Vai techniques class. And I remember coming in the morning and like seeing this dude, rock star, like he looks like a rock star, walking through the offices at Berklee right around my desk. And he's like, hey, what's up, man? And like just went in the studio. I was like, what the? That was Steve Vai. Like they didn't tell us Steve Vai was coming.
No.
And then he was in there recording his stuff and like his wah pedal, that Bad Horsey wah pedal.
Yeah.
Like I remember one of my buddies had a Morley wah pedal and I wasn't super impressed with it. But Steve was doing some stuff, I think wah technique stuff in the class, and it sounded amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember he came out and like was just leaned on the like cubicle, like right next to me. And he was like, hey, what's up? And I was like, man, that wah pedal sounds great. What is that? He's like, that's my wah. That's my Bad Horsey wah. And I was like, oh, duh, dummy. Like, So, but yeah, that's my Steve Vai story for the day. It was, he's talking about larger than life rock star. Man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah.
But he's a nice guy. He's a really nice guy. All right, Tor, you ready to do this lightning round get down, man?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So we have a cruising altitude of 105 BPM. I'm going to pop that sucker on right now. It's just to create a little suspense. No big deal. Nobody's going to get hurt. Nobody's going to be scared. If you want, you can explain your answers. You don't have to, but I love hearing explanations, so feel free to do it. First question's always the same. Lenin or McCartney?
Lennon.
Okay.
And I love both of them, but I think that Lennon had I think he made less bad songs. McCartney has a couple of songs where I go like, oh God, you shouldn't have done that. Plus, he always seemed to have a little bit more of the rock and roll edge. But that's a tough choice. I almost feel bad. I want to call Paul up and say, sorry, man, I love you too.
It's funny. I wonder what the percentage is if you like look at the whole catalog of who wrote more, who sang more. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I don't know that I've ever done that. I'm
pretty sure somebody probably did. I never checked that, but yeah.
Right. All right, cool. What's cooler, jean jacket or leather jacket?
Leather jacket.
BMX or skateboarding?
BMX for me. I love skateboarding. Looks so cool, but I'm 6'6", so I'm not going on a skateboard. I'll crash and die horribly.
Okay. All right. Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall?
Oh God. I have to say The Wall. Okay. At least I probably listen to Dark Side of the Moon more now, but when I grew up and I wanted to, learn guitar, that The Wall was a huge thing for me.
Okay, cool. Board games or video games?
If I have to say something, it would probably be video games, but I don't really play video games, and I rarely play board games. I used to be really into Counter-Strike like 15 years ago, but not anymore.
All right. All right. If you're going to be reborn, would you rather be put into the past or the future?
Oh, that's a good question. I would probably be put into the future. And I think
Okay.
the reason for that is I think there's a lot of interesting things that, that happened in the past that I would love to have been a part of. But in general, as much as, we all, myself included, bitch and moan about how bad things are and how much better they were in the old days, when you really think about it, things are, I know that we're wrecking the planet and everything. That's not a good thing, but things are in general for people, for human beings, are better now than ever. If you imagine looking back, say, 1,000 years, how people's lives were back then. Basically, the life we live now is like the life of a king. They used to have a gesture, like a jester that would come in and entertain them. We just flick on not even a channel. We just take our mobile phone. We have, entertainment. We have instant access to every sort of food and beverage, at least here in the Western world. So I'm excited to see what will happen in the future. Plus, I guess that if we keep going like this, it'll probably be an even better life, unless we wreck the entire planet and I just, will suddenly transform into this sort of barren, toxic wasteland. Who knows?
I hope not. We can turn that around. We just got to unite and turn it around is all.
Yep.
And you know what, man? You can go out your front door and no saber-toothed tigers chasing you. That's a plus.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
All right.
No horrible plagues or, oh, wait a second.
Oh, yeah. We gotta think about that one. WandaVision or The Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
I haven't seen either of them, actually.
Tor, you gotta see him, man. If I'd tell you, I mean, I don't want to throw shade, but watch WandaVision. Falcons,
is it good?
It's really good.
I literally just got Disney Plus, so I haven't seen that yet. I read about the WandaVision and it sounded a little weird, but who knows?
It's good. I mean, I'm a Marvel nerd, but it's really good. It's really good. All right, semi-hollow or solid body guitar?
I look around here, and apart from all the horrible guitars, I have one. I have two hollow bodies and a shit ton of solid bodies. So I'd have to say solid bodies. But there is a story. I have a lot of guitars around here. Most of them are like obnoxiously ugly, cheap, metal style guitars. I have one really nice guitar that I mentioned earlier that I had an uncle that played jazz guitar, and he unfortunately passed away some years ago. But he willed his guitar to me, and it's a original 1959 Gibson ES 175. It's in another room, but that's like the most ridiculous guitar, and that's like a big, thick jazz box hollow body. So that it might actually win out just by the sheer fact that I don't deserve a guitar like that, but it's very nice to have. But in general, for general, definitely solid bodies.
All right, cool. If you had a superpower, one of these two, would you rather be able to control the weather or control time?
Oh God, control time. That's way more fun.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
All right. And then the last question. This is sometimes super easy. Sometimes it's really hard. If you could take one album, doesn't have to be like your favorite album of all time, but if you could take one album, erase it from your memory so you've never heard it, just to experience it for the first time again, what record would that be?
That's a good question. So I would probably say the White Album by the Beatles.
Okay, why?
It's just, I mean, there are albums that came out later where I remember my first experience. I remember listening to Passion and Warfare the first time. I remember listening to Vulgar Display of Power the first time. I remember listening to 10. I remember listening to Bad Motorfinger. Some of these albums that mean a lot to me. And I vividly remember that sensation of hearing them and going like, oh my God, this is insane. But I grew up on the Beatles, and they have It could also be like Access Bodas Love or Electric Ladyland for that matter. But because I grew up on it, I actually don't. It's always been in my life. It's like you take your parents for granted, right? They're just there. So you might remember when you met your best friend the first time, but you don't remember just the people that's always been in your life. And that's sort of how I feel with Beatles. It's always been in my life, and I would actually love to hear that album for the first time and really feel how it would affect me, because I actually don't remember.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's crazy, man. I love that question too. I mean, because depending on what day I catch you, it would probably change too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It will probably be either a Beatles or a Hendrix album. That's probably a given.
Yeah.
But
speaking of which, like, I can't remember what the anniversary is, but do you remember that Stone Free tribute record that Jimi Hendrix? So that version of Hey Baby Land of the Rising Sun, that was McCready, Jeff Ament, Matt Cameron, and Chris Cornell. That's like one of my favorite. I mean, that whole record. I mean, come on now, Jeff Beck and Seal doing Manic Depression. And like, oh my God, dude. That album was like huge for me at that time. But that was the first time I ever heard that song, Hey Baby Land of the Rising Sun. And that was the first time I got exposed to what like a vibe is, like a Deja vibe kind of pedal. Oh, yeah. And I was like, what is that sound like? I was in high school. I probably was a sophomore in high school or something. Had no clue what that was. And now I'm in like that's like a staple on my board. You know what I mean? Like I have to have one of those.
Yeah. But I have way too many of them. It's horrible. But you gotta have them.
Do you have an actual old school vibe?
No. I don't have an old one. Those are crazy expensive. And from what I hear, they break a lot. I'm sure James has like 5, but I have a couple of different ones. So I have currently on my board down here, there's the Vibe Machine from Drybell, which is sounds really good, and it's small. A lot of these, the really big, like, oh, this sounds exactly like the old ones, kind of vibe pedals. I like the size of, this, because that's the original ones, and I don't use it all that much, so I can't really justify putting like this, giant cheese board on my pedal board. So, but I have, what's it called? Oh God. I can't even remember now.
As far as vibe?
It's like it's this size. It has this sort of swirly.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Oh
Mojo vibe. Mojo. It's the Mojo vibe. Yeah. So I have that, and I have a Desha vibe from Full Tone, and I obviously have the TC vibe as well, and I have the one from Voodoo Lab, and for some odd reason I'm still looking at like, so there's a new, I think it's called the Bro Vibe, that looks really cool, and there's also Kingtone that did one called 1968, which looks really cool. You like that one?
It's great. Oh yeah. It's really good. But, I mean, everything Jesse does is like, everything Jesse does is kind of like solid,
Yeah. And it helps he's a monster player as well.
It's true. That's very true. Well, cool. Well, Tor, I don't want to hold you up. I know it's late, buddy. But thank you again so much. This was so fun talking to you and hearing your story. So I appreciate you making time.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, man. So everybody, check out the UA stuff. I mean, I played through 2 of the 3 pedals, and they were monstrous. And this man is to blame for their monstrosity. But yeah, everybody, take care of yourself, take care of each other. We'll see you next time.